DOAR said. There was a program that the legislation was enacted in 2014, which added thermal energy to the APS, and so that's for heat only. Combined heat and power plants, even if it was a gas plant, was already eligible for getting APS credits, because it's always a good thing to subsidize, to incentivize switching to combined heat and power, because it's a more efficient way to generate electricity. However, it sets up this potential conflict where we have the rules that were set up under the RPS for bioenergy that Sammy just told you about, and then now comes the APS and sets its own rules in place for combined heat power plants and thermal bioenergy, which has the potential, as we believe it is indeed doing, to undermine the RPS. So I'm going to talk quickly about 3 different kind of areas of concern within the APS. The regulations treat each of these areas, and I'm going to highlight, there's just so much to say, I'm going to highlight some of the main areas of concern. I know that DOAR said that they had spent a disproportionate amount of time on the bioenergy regulation part of the APS. Well, they have no idea. I mean, we submitted probably a total of at least 60 or 70 pages of testimony, and we're a small organization. So first, just to sort of embed this in place, Massachusetts Global Warming Solutions Act is really the flagship legislation of the state. It is the crown jewel of climate legislation, and we are justly proud of this piece of legislation. And thanks to the work of our colleagues at CLF, one who joins us today, Caitlin Peel, they won the case against CEP that put some even more teeth in the Global Warming Solutions Act, that DEP must impose declining limits on emissions in major emitting sectors. That means the actual amount of CO2 emitted needs to be less each year. So here's a graphic of those different sectors. As DOER pointed out, we should be justly proud of the decline in electricity emissions over the years. This is DOER's own data that they published. The green line is the electricity emissions. But as you can see, there hasn't been too much of a decline in the heating sector emissions. Transportation is still the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. But heating sector is a really good place to start if you want to start making inroads into our emissions. So now comes DOER with regulations to incentivize biomass and for thermal and also within the CHP provisions. And CO2 stack emissions from biomass thermal boilers are greater than from other boilers. So this is per unit energy. Now I meant to say this before, I'll say it now. DOER is doing their job. We have some issues with how they're doing it, but it was the legislature that chose to enact legislation adding thermal bioenergy and other thermal technologies to the APS. That wasn't DOER. They have to write regulations. We wish the regulations were better. But ultimately, the problem here was with what the legislature did, and we hope that there is a legislative fix. So DOER can't do anything about this. This is just physics. There's more CO2 coming out the stack when you burn biomass than when you burn fossil fuels. So how do we call this a low carbon solution to climate change? Well, I mentioned the MANAMED study. The MANAMED study looked at both the electricity, biomass burned for electricity and big power plants, but they also looked at thermal boilers. And this was their results. When you are burning green trees that would otherwise, but for being harvested, continue growing and taking carbon out of the atmosphere, and you mix that with logging residues for fuel that we can assume that they would decompose anyway and emit CO2 anyway, so maybe their carbon impact isn't quite as bad. So if you have a fuel mixture made up of those two sources, you have to operate your unit continuously for 15 to 30 years until trees growing back have offset enough emissions so that you have parity with an oil burner. And you need to operate it for 60 to 90 years to have parity with natural gas. That's for a thermal boiler. For a pure electricity unit that's not using combined heat and power, the time frames were compared against coal and natural gas, and you can see them there. But we're chiefly concerned with the thermal, and that's why those are highlighted. This analysis assumed green chips. It did not assume pellet manufacturing. Pellet manufacturing is an extremely energy-intensive process, whereby you have to cut down trees. I mean, okay, first of all, I'm going to say, many pellets are indeed made with sawdust at sawmills and things like that, so that's a much lower greenhouse gas footprint. But we don't have a lot of that stuff available. So if you're going to expand the use of pellets, as this program would do, you have to go out and cut down new trees that otherwise would not be cut. You cut them down, you drag them back, you strip the bark off, you chip them, you pulverize them, you cook them, you shove it through a die to make the pellet, and then you have to dry the pellet somehow, either using natural gas or biomass, leavings that aren't of high enough quality to be actually incorporated into the pellet itself. So there's a significant manufacturing and transport greenhouse gas component to making pellets. These numbers do not take that into account. The reductions that Manomet assumed occur because it is assumed that forests are growing back. And if forests are to grow back, they have to not be logged again. So Manomet made the assumption that after harvesting for bioenergy, forests are just left alone and not reharvested until they've fully grown back. Okay? So there's a number of assumptions embedded in this modeling that underpins the greenhouse gas accounting that DOER has used for both the RPS and the APS. So I just, one more quick note about wood pellets. I said some of them are made from sawdust. Another source of wood that can be burned as green chips is residues. That's tops and limbs that are left over after saw timber harvesting, where the assumption is this material was generated anyway, it's just lying there, it's going to decompose, it's going to let off CO2, so if we burn it for energy, we're going to let off CO2 faster, but at least we'll recover some energy out of it. That's when people say that residues are a quote-unquote low carbon source of energy, that's what they're talking about, that there are these anyway emissions, and so we might as well burn the material for energy. But the truth is that if you're really interested in burning pellets, and pellets is what you need if you want to lower your particulate emissions, you're really not using much residues because, for instance, the study that just came out last month, a study of actual operating pellet plants in Maine, found that about 2% of pellets were made from residues, and the rest was from pulpwood or small trees. And pulpwood is large diameter residues or big trees. So this is the reality of the pellet industry. It's not people running through the woods with tweezers, carefully selecting only those things that they knew were going to die anyway. So Sammy and Bill, I think, both mentioned that one of the changes that was made between the RPS and the APS was that the RPS had a 20-year time frame period to show benefit relative to fossil fuels, based on this assumption that trees are growing back. When DOER crafted the APS regulations, unfortunately, the legislation did not specify a time frame, and DOER chose a 30-year time frame for showing the benefit, which is itself an implicit admission of how carbon unfavorable this technology is, that you have to bend the goalposts and move the goalposts constantly to show any benefit. So just between, I mean, interestingly, this data, I just pulled these data off the web. This is the most up-to-date data of carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere. 2013 is when we started talking about amending the APS. 2017 is where we are now. And in that time, DOER saw fit to suggest that we can wait 30 years to show a benefit. And meanwhile, we're going to be emitting more CO2 than fossil fuels that we're ostensibly replacing. Further, with the 30-year time frame, how are you going to show a reduction of 50% compared to the fossil fuel when you can't even achieve parity with natural gas in 60 years? That just doesn't make sense. Why are we talking about, look, I am no fan of natural gas, okay? We do not receive any funding from fossil fuel industry, sometimes we get asked that, so I'm just going to say that right now. I'm not a fan, and I think there's a lot bigger emissions from natural gas than we're talking about, and we need to be very careful. But frankly, it's crazy to take clean natural gas, which has low, and I say clean, I mean particulate emissions. Take clean natural gas boilers offline and replace them with highly polluting and even more carbon-intensive biomass burners, and then pay people tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in subsidies to do that. That's crazy. So let's talk a little bit about forest harvesting standards, the sustainability standards. This is a chunk of text from the October version of the regulations. All of this red material was added to the regulation with no public review, no opportunity for public review. It came in after. We had complained bitterly to DOER that the sustainability standards had no teeth, because, for instance, as Sammy pointed out, the harvesting standards for the RPS require soil fertility to be taken into consideration. But that was all taken out. And instead we got this nice text about all these wonderful, things that are sustainable, how we define sustainable harvesting. But none of this is enforceable. Is DOER going to go out and make sure that, conservation of biological diversity? Really? That's so nice. That sounds great, but it doesn't mean anything. DOER instead said, for sustainability, we're going to let independent certifiers sign off on forests being harvested sustainability. And one of the programs that they said could be a signatory to that was the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, SFI, along with others. So lands can be harvested under these programs and they receive approval. So SFI is one of them. So this is a photograph taken by a colleague in Canada of SFI certified biomass harvesting. It looks weird, huh? That is considered sustainable harvesting by SFI, the same program that DOER is entrusting Massachusetts forests to. Here's another picture from Maine. I don't know if this was certified or not, but this was sent to me by Jim Wallace, who may be known to you. And he was appalled by this. Because, as you can see, the land has been scrubbed clean. And for nutrient-poor soils, this can be a real problem because micronutrients are held in the low-diameter material. You need to retain that stuff on site to maintain soil fertility. If you lose micronutrients, you have a real problem with acidic soils. You also can have more erosion. You lose wildlife habitat. It's waste. I mean, it'll grow back. It'll be like blackberries for, a couple of decades, and then some stuff will poke up, and it'll look okay in a couple of decades. But, why are we fooling around with this? So, combined heat and power, as I mentioned, is subsidized under the RPS, and it has some regulations governing it, that Sammy talked about. And the APS also will give subsidies to biomass combined heat and power. And there are these categories that Sammy talked about, greenhouse gas emissions accounting, efficiency requirement for the facility itself, for sustainability, all of these things the APS standards don't contain those or contain them in such a majorly modified way as to be essentially meaningless. Let's talk about air quality. This is a little analysis we did looking at recently produced data from EPA, National Emissions Inventory. Of course, they have to truth the data and quality check it, so unfortunately the 2014 data wasn't released until 2017. So this is particulate pollution just from residential wood combustion. The way they do this is they use census data to go around and figure out how many homes approximately in a county are burning wood, and then they use standard emissions factors. So this is not directly measured. This is definitely a modeled result, but it's what we have. It's the data we have. You go to war with the data you have. And Worcester County happens to be the eighth highest source of particulate pollution from wood burning in the country. That really surprised me to see that. Could you advance the slide for me, please? Thank you. So residential wood combustion, depending on whether you look at the county data or the state level, state data is somewhere between 2.5 and 5%. But it's a small number of homes in the whole state. Account for 80% of the particulate pollution from the heating sector. And then commercial and industrial biomass burning accounts for another 3%. So talk about disproportionate impact. And this has real consequences. Burning wood, anyone who lives next to a home that's had wood burner, green wood or smoky on startup or just chronically bad operation knows what it can make your home literally unlivable. Now, I don't think that, definitely DOER is correct when they say that the kind of burners that they're incentivizing tend to be lower, they do have either emission controls on them or they're burning clean wood pellets, and so the emissions are not going to be as bad as like the really chronically outdoor wood boilers that, the worst case scenario, definitely not. But the point is, we already have an acknowledged problem with particulate pollution in this state. So you were asking about the size of boilers, Representative Provost, and this is a picture of actual 2.15 MMBTU boilers. So they're actually, they're not that big. These are for heat. This is 2 Viessmann units. So these are like the size that you would install in a high school. 1 or 2 of these, and sometimes facilities will put in two burners so that they can really crank it up when they need to, and then they use one on the shoulder season, like in the fall or spring. For heating, these are big. This is not a combined heat power plant, though. That would look more like a regular actual power plant, like more like a smokestack. The APS regulations were supposed to, according to the enabling statute, they're supposed to be performance standards that are protective of public health and limited to best-in-class technologies. And yet, these standards actually set different levels of particulate pollution controls depending on the technology. And the more restrictive ones are year-sensitive populations, but that means like schools or nursing homes. But, if you live in a neighborhood and you have an asthmatic kid, that is by definition a sensitive population. And given the long lifetime of these very big, chunky units, which indeed is 20 to 30 years, like any boiler, we're talking about a potential to emit a lot of pollution over a long period of time. The EPA's regulations do not comply with EPA standards. They may comply with the step 1, but step 2, new source performance standards from EPA are coming out in about a year and a half, 2 years, and we know what they're going to be. In fact, I think the step 1 boiler thermal, I can't remember if this the standards here that I have on the screen are for step 1 or step 2. But basically, this is what EPA recommends for boiler storage. The reason that you want thermal storage for a boiler is that you can operate the boiler less. It's less turning on and off to meet heating load because you're heating up a big volume of water, and then that water continues to release heat. So it dramatically decreases fuel burning overall, it increases efficiency, and it decreases particulate pollution. So having adequate thermal storage is extremely important. So as you can see, the APS thermal requirement is 7% of EPA's standard here. We raised this in comments with DOER again and again, and received no feedback on it whatsoever. Furthermore, they also don't comply with the EPA Step 2 standard because DOER is employing a air emissions testing protocol that is not going to be legal under Step 2. So basically, they are incentivizing and providing money to boilers that will not meet the national standard in just a year or two. I think that subsidy programs should be reserved for the creme de la creme, not average Joe performance that doesn't even meet what are relatively weak federal standards. Finally, financially, this is not something that DOER invented. This has been in this regulation for a while. I think back a couple of years anyway. But we just noticed this fairly recently. I mean, it's such a long regulation; it takes forever to read it. But anyway, combined heat power plants qualify both the RPS and the APS. So if the plant actually meets the RPS standard, they can get electricity credits from the RPS and the APS. And then the cherry on the cake is they can get APS credits for the thermal energy they produce. So this is literally double dipping, double public subsidies for the same megawatt hours of electricity produced at one unit. I don't think that that's what the legislature intends. I don't think it's a good use of public money. I think it's crazy to be incentivizing this stuff when in fact, as Bill said, there are literally more homes that burn coal for heat in Massachusetts than use solar thermal. We should be putting our foot to the floor for solar and geothermal and air source heat pumps. This is pumping tons of pollution out of stack, something calling green energy does not make it so. So basically, this is just my overview. We have concerns in all these areas: greenhouse gas accounting, forest harvesting, air pollution, and subsidies. Finally, let's return to why we're all here: climate warming. This is a synopsis of many modeling runs for future temperature scenarios for the planet. The only place you want to be is in the blue area. Everything else is a big problem, and we are right now on a hot track trajectory upwards and not toward the blue. What the blue tells you is what Bill was telling you, that we not only have to reduce emissions, we actually have to take CO2 that's in the atmosphere now out of the atmosphere. That's what net negative global emissions means. And we need to do that pretty darn quick. We need to start doing that now. And we need to be at net negative by, well, this is for a 2-degree scenario. This is not for a 1.5-degree scenario, which is what we all said in the Paris Agreement that we wanted. So, I think we need a new focus for forest policy and climate policy in this state. Massachusetts is a leader. You guys could be global leaders, and I do mean literally international leaders recognized and thanked internationally if you put forests first and find ways to pay landowners to not cut their forests for energy. That is nuts. we need to grow more and bigger trees. And just to inspire you a little bit, to let you know what's possible in Massachusetts, I asked my friend Bob Leverett, who measures champion trees all over America and in the Northeast, to send me a couple of pictures of what can be possible in Massachusetts. These are all pictures from Massachusetts. These are old growth forests that probably have never been cut. They're tiny little remnants of it out in the western part of the state. That's a yellow birch. I mean, isn't that crazy? That's nuts. I've never seen anything like that. Hemlocks. Yep. Gorgeous. White ash. That's champion white ash. Red oak near Smith College. And New England's tallest tree, a white pine in the Mohawk Trail State Forest, 175 feet. The tallest living thing in New England, right here in Massachusetts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for having me today. I anticipated that my co-panelists would cover a lot of ground, so I'm going to try not to be too repetitive. As a threshold matter, I would also just like to echo Mr. Yassa and Ms. Booth in expressing concerns about the procedural measures that the DOER is taking to get to where they are today, and the numerous changes that they made after the notice and comment period. And despite entreaties from CLF and from many of our partners, they did not reopen comments on the final rates on those many changes. So the balance of my testimony I'm going to address just quickly, because I think it has been discussed, the APS statute itself that directed DOER to write regulations, and the Global Warming Solutions Act, because that's a particular area of interest to determine for CLF. So for the APS statute, there's definitely still a lot of confusion, I think, among policymakers and certainly among citizens about the carbon impact of burning biomass for energy. And even despite how long we've had the results of the MANAMET study, I think it needs to be repeated at every opportunity that there are no assumptions that can be made about biomass and carbon. If you want to, as the legislature chose to do in 2014, incentivize some form of biomass burning for energy, you have to do a very careful calculation to make sure that you're not just leaving those higher than fossil smokestack emissions unmitigated. And my co-panelists did a great job of describing how that happens. So this statute came about in 2014. It was the final language was an amendment in the Telecom Utilities and Energy Committee from a bill that was first proposed by then Senator Feingold, Representative Devers, and Senator Eldridge. And the key provisions that were added were some of the language that my panelists have talked about, including the clause, provided, however, that facilities using biomass fuel should be low emission, use efficient energy conversion technologies, and fuel that's produced by means of sustainable forestry practices. This is very clearly the legislature stating that while they are choosing to incentivize some form of biomass energy, it's not based on an assumption about carbon neutrality biomass. It's based on the science of the MANAMET study. And they also mandated that if DOER were going to use a different set of standards than an existing set of standards, by which they meant RPS standards for sustainability and unit efficiency, they need to explain themselves, essentially. And we don't believe that that's been done adequately. I think, just quickly on this provision, the carefully crafted drafted compromise language that was added in the Telecom Utilities and Energy Committee. It cannot be satisfied with making vague and unenforceable statements like those that Mary highlighted about sustainability in the regulations. You can't effectuate a statutory mandate that subsidized biomass be used or come from sustainable sources by just repeating the word sustainability and other nice words. That's a very specific scientific calculation that was put together with a huge amount of stakeholder input in the RPS context and then abandoned for the APS. And it was great to hear Assistant Secretary Woodcock talk about renewable thermal overall, replacing both oil and gas being generated from thermal. I think that's a step forward for the administration, but it's crucial when it comes to heat pumps and other non-combustion renewable thermal that we are all, take all effort possible to move those technologies ahead. But when it comes to combustion-based renewable thermal biomass, the fuel sourcing alone can blow a huge carbon hole in what the renewable thermal policy is actually trying to achieve. And so I'm just going to quickly talk a little bit about the GWSA to that point. So the GWSA requires volumetric emission reductions in greenhouse gases tapering down to an 80% reduction by 2050. And having accurate data about emissions in all sectors of the economy is vital to that implementation, as the King decision showed. So poor implementation of this APS statute is going to make DEP's job a lot harder, or the administration or future administration will be doing their job without adequate documentation of emissions from all sectors of the economy. If you allow lax control over the feedstocks that are being incentivized by state policy. And I'm going to just highlight this point with an excerpt from the 2015 Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2020 update from the Baker administration, EPA. They're speaking about what they term renewable thermal technologies. So this is at pages 68 to 69 of the 2015 update. GHG impact. The CECP update forecasts a 1 million metric tons CO2 equivalent reduction in emissions due to renewable thermal technologies. More robust reductions are predicted for renewable thermal air source heat pumps. These reductions are included in all cost-effective energy efficiency goals. Greenhouse gas emissions from biomass and biofuels used for thermal energy are important to consider, but Massachusetts policies will limit the eligibility of feedstocks, advanced biofuels, and residue-woody biomass to those which demonstrate real and rapid greenhouse gas benefits, such as advanced biofuels and residue-woody biomass. Their own plan to meet the Global Warming Solutions Act for 2020 and beyond depends on DOER writing accurate and adequate regulations for these fuels now under the APS. And just because they say that in the plan, and just because DOER uses buzzwords in the regulations does not actually effectuate the meaning of the statute or what they need to do to keep up their end of the bargain for implementing the GWSA. And the intent of this addition to the APS in 2014 was to effectuate the policy that came out of the Amendment study. It was not intended to assume carbon neutrality, and if we were able to assume good faith by every actor, then we wouldn't have to write regulations in the first place. You have to close every loophole, or they're going to drive a truck through it, and we won't be able to control the emissions at all. And I'll conclude it there for the day, but we're happy to take any questions. And thank you again.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I think we had an excellent discussion and long.
Yes, sorry.
You answered most of the questions. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to now invite the final speakers who will be kept for 3 minutes each. We will ask questions at the end of the speech. Casey, Carvel, Patricia. Okay, Patricia DeVille, I'm sorry, Patrick.
God bless
Susan M. Mazzino,
3 minutes, well, because it makes sense.
Janet Sinclair, and Michael Keller.
Oh, there, oh.
Thank you, Chair Smizek and members of the committee. My name is Casey Arvell, and I'm the Director of Public Policy for the American Lung Association, which is the oldest voluntary health organization in the nation. And our mission is to save lives by improving lung health and preventing lung disease. To this end, we're here today because we believe that the inclusion of biomass, and more specifically, the incentivization of biomass, is really a health issue. Especially when you're comparing biomass to sources that don't produce harmful particle pollution. The emissions from biomass include harmful particle pollution, carbon monoxide, and nitrogen oxide. I know it's been touched on it before, but I do just want to mention that this is a big concern, especially for people with asthma, and Massachusetts already has a high rate of asthma. Approximately 1 in 9 people across the Commonwealth do have asthma, and this would increase asthma attacks and trips to the hospital. I really don't want to speak much longer on the whole topic just because I think you have heard a lot today, but I do just kind of want to speak from the health voice that this is something that should be considered when you are trying to incentivize energy sources, and that we really should look at sources that would not produce harmful particle pollution. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Susan Massino. I'm a neuroscientist. My PhD is in biology, and my research is focused on brain health and preventing and treating brain disease. I've published nearly 100 papers and 3 books on brain homeostasis and health. We know that lifestyles and environment matter tremendously for brain health, and particularly for the brains of children, older people, those with any pre-existing condition, and neurological disorders are expensive and poorly treated, and we have very few cures for any of them. What's clear, and has become increasingly clear in recent years, is that particulates produced by burning woody biomass harm brain function across age groups and not just in vulnerable populations. There are additional effects if you have a genetic or metabolic predisposition, and there's some differential effects in men versus women. But in general, these measurable effects on brain areas are in areas associated with personality, cognition, and memory. And these are the areas that determine who we are and undergird our individual and our collective success. So a subset of the problems include increased rates of autism, depression and anxiety, and overall distress, increased risk of ischemic events such as heart attack or stroke found within 2 days of exposure, specifically in that time frame, increased rates of type 2 diabetes, which is associated with a number of other health conditions, and cognitive impairment, and increased rates of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And I'd like to point out that an epidemiological and significant relationship was found even in areas with very low pollution, such as Australia. And these health effects and healthcare costs are higher than those associated with exposure to fossil fuel emissions. So 2 weeks ago, I was at the annual Society for Neuroscience meeting with 30,000 of my best friends in Washington, D.C. And I would just like to say that my fellow scientists were really shocked for several reasons to find out that Massachusetts is planning to subsidize burning wood for renewable energy. We're smarter than this. and our public policies should support brain health as a priority. I'm involved in a number of community groups. I'm from Western Mass, and we strongly support energy conservation, smart building practices, insulation, solar thermal, and geothermal as the best ways to reduce our energy demand and execute clean energy solutions. Solar thermal and geothermal almost have a battery system built in because of the stored liquids. So I know that some of these research studies weren't published when these policies came into place. And I recognize that there were good intentions to keep forests, reimburse foresters for woody biomass, and get renewable energy. I would contend, and I have some ideas perhaps during the discussion, I brought some photos of how this could be done, and those three goals could be separated rather than combined into one policy. Thank you for your attention.
First of all, I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me here to speak today. My name is Patrick Devlin. I live in Greenfield. I served 6 years on the Greenfield Town Council and served as the chair of the Economic Development Committee. And I'm proud to say that I chaired a committee which wrote the Greenfield Town Ordinance 200-7.19, the Biomass and Wood Burning Energy Systems, dated May 2015, to prevent a large-scale biomass incineration from coming to our town. A copy of this ordinance is attached here. A group of concerned citizens and scientists worked with our committee to craft this legislation, which was spurred by a town-wide vote, which was overwhelmingly against the biomass plant. Our work was informed by scientific evidence and testimony based on a state-mandated committee called the Manomet Study. To date, we have no scientific data which contravenes that study, and so I wonder what new scientific evidence DOER has which makes this study outdated. I probably don't need to remind you that there is ample scientific and medical proof that burning in any form adds to the increase of health-related respiratory problems among our citizens, most notably lung cancer and childhood asthma. This assertion is amply supported by the American Lung Association and the American Medical Association. We cannot take a step backwards now and allow burning to harm our citizenry. The science behind the Manomet study was unflawed, and I do not understand why it's considered that burning in any form to be safe, except perhaps because you are being strongly pressured again by individuals who would profit from it. It doesn't matter if you are burning for electricity or thermal applications. Honestly, folks, this is not the way Massachusetts wants to go as they strive to meet their emission standards. This will increase emissions, not reduce them. It appears that the regulations got weaker and weaker as time went on. Usually on these kind of issues, the Commonwealth, it sets the bar for the rest of the nation. But it appears that the ball was really dropped this time on this issue. One final comment. How can you possibly consider regulations that put the desires of profiteers in the wood products industry above the health of our children? Thank you, all of you, for your careful attention on this very important issue.
Hi, can you hear me? My name is JVC Camcorder. I'm involved with, here, yes? Okay, sorry, I had a soft voice. I'm part of a group called Concerned Citizens of Franklin County. We're a group that stopped the biomass power plant in Greenfield. And I just want to say a little bit about what it's like when bad public policies come to our towns. There were 3 power plants, biomass power plants, proposed in Western Mass, Springfield, Russell, and Greenfield. I was involved in all 3 of them. And I know firsthand what it's like when people have to fight for their town, fight for their health, fight for their community. People were so upset about the subsidies going to these projects. People were really angry about the amount of wood that was going to be harvested from God knows where. Once people learned about these projects, particularly in Greenfield,
They were really angry about it, but it was too late. The developer came in with a $250,000 MTC plan, and frankly, that's what got their foot in the door. And so we won in Greenfield and Russell, but not because of all the outrage that people were experiencing. We won because the renewable portfolio standard got changed so that these things will no longer get subsidies. Otherwise, these projects would be in. And now here we are again. And the same proponents that pushed for the RPS, pushed for the APS, and as far as I'm concerned, that law got written for the industry and by the industry. Watching how the regulations in the APS got changed over time, it looked to me like the only people being listened to were the biomass proponents. We were not listened to. They went so far as to not only first, you either get your power, your furnace paid for, or you get credits. Now you get both. This is just a terrible, terrible policy. I know I'm running out of time, but I would like to set the record straight. I was at a meeting, DEP was there. They said if there are any wood smoke issues in things that are unregulated, meaning under 3 million BTUs per hour, the DEP would run out and mitigate that problem. And I almost went through the roof when I heard this. I've been trying to deal with terrible, terrible wood smoke pollution in my neighborhood. I've gone to DEP, DPH, and my Board of Health. Everyone passed the buck. And then what happened for me was that 16 months ago, I had lung cancer surgery. I'm not a candidate for lung cancer. 40% of all lung cancers are caused by air pollution. I'm one of those people. So the idea that the legislature passed a law to pay people to burn wood that's going to harm my health even more than it's already harmed is something that really bothers me. And I think that everyone here should be ashamed collectively that we would have passed a law to pollute the air for people like me. And I'm not happy that I have to protect myself from these policies. Thank you. And at your earliest meetings, change this law. You shouldn't be paying for biomass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, for having this hearing. I'm Michael Kellett. I'm the Executive Director of Restore the North Woods. We're a nonprofit organization based in Massachusetts where we do regional work, especially in Maine and Western Mass. I've worked on forest issues for more than 30 years, and when I looked at these regulations, I was appalled by the forest side of things. You heard a lot about the emissions, which is in the public health side, which is really bad in terms of burning wood. In terms of the climate impacts are bad, but also the forest impacts are potentially really bad. And although we're told that biomass is going to come from sustainable forestry, the term sustainable forestry is really meaningless. There's no scientific agreement on what that means. It's whatever you call it is sustainable according to the industry. And as was mentioned by Mary, the regulation has very vague language that almost anything can meet these standards, and you can never tell whether it's sustainable or not. In fact, the other thing, in response to the testimony by the DOER folks, that logging for biomass is going to be a good thing for the forest and for the economy, that's just not true. The reality is, aside from the sustainability thing, logging here is not better than logging in other places. We have better standards than other places. We have virtually no standards because there is no definition of sustainability. Well, most of the wood that comes to the U.S. that's imported comes from Canada and Europe, which probably have better standards than we have, actually. The idea that it improves the forest health and helps endangered wildlife species, the log is another myth. We don't need a log for wildlife. Most wildlife that are endangered need protected forests. Logging timber demand doesn't create an incentive for landowners to keep their land. There's no proof of that. And I noticed that when the question was asked of the DOER folks, they didn't answer that question because there's no proof that's true. It's another myth that we're told. The reality is that a person's going to get a lot of money from developing their land. a little bit of a few $1,000s for logging is not going to change their mind. The other thing is that logging forests is perfectly fine when it comes to carbon and climate versus preserving forests. That's just not true. As Bill Moonmouth said, forests are vital to fighting climate change. We've got to save as much forest land as possible intact, standing, not logged. And the whole jobs thing, we heard about jobs. Well, Maine is the perfect example of full-scale industrial forestry, and timber jobs and mill jobs in Maine are plummeting, and the economy is a disaster in northern Maine. So, to close, our group strongly opposes this provision. We urge the legislature to look at new laws that actually purge our legal system and regulations of burning biomass for energy. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you. Just for my notes, Sinclair, you talked about a developer coming in with a grant for $250 million from where?
At the time, it was Mass Technology Collaborative, but now it's Mass CDC. It got changed. All three power plants that were proposed in Western Mass at that time each got $250,000 in Mass Technology money, collaborative money. What happened at some juncture, what year it was, I don't know, NTC got dismantled and it got switched over to the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center.
The Mass Clean Energy Center
Is now-
was behind these grants?
Well, yes, Mass DOER of the state. I mean, all of this money, this is my point exactly, is that these are public policies, public money to push these projects. And they would do it, they had $250,000. They had lawyers, they had developers, they had engineers, they had all stuff. They would go in, like in Greenfield, they went in and talked to all the powers that be, behind the backs of the citizens, sprung it on the town. At the first hearing in Greenfield, 400 people showed up to the zoning board hearing. The only authority at that juncture is the zoning board, right? The zoning board. So the zoning board had 400 people show up at a hearing, ignored all of us, and went ahead and gave the permit anyway. And once that permit happens, everybody's going down the road. The other thing I'd like to point out about these boilers is that, which I'm sorry, I'm out of time, but with the boilers, the only thing that's going to happen with these boilers is they're going to have to get a building inspector permit. And the building inspection permit is just going to say, do you install it correctly? If it's over 3 million BTUs, it'll be DP, you'll have to do an air permit. Under that, there's nothing. And with these regulations, there's nothing about cumulative air impact. So you have air pollution all around you, like I have, and then you add with these big boilers. There's nothing in these EPS regulations that account for that. There's almost nothing in EPS regulations that account for siting, except for if you go to school or a hospital. I have lung cancer. I don't live at school. I don't live at a hospital. I live at home. So what is really frustrating for a lot of us is that we feel as though we're fighting our own government to protect our health.
All three were both?
Pardon me?
All three were.
Well, what happened was, because, as mentioned earlier, that we really pushed to change the renewable portfolio standard. When we changed it, a lot of these power plants could not qualify for renewable energy credits. Even though we had an 84% vote against the biomass power plant in Greenfield, the authority was still the zoning board, and we couldn't do anything except for do a zoning board appeal in court. Patrick and I worked on this together. We raised $50,000 or $60,000 in legal fees. Had this stuff sitting in court for years and years. The neighbors, everybody in the area, their lives were on hold. Literally, people were getting divorced. Relationships were strained. I mean, it was a terrible time for people to basically be fighting this big monster that was being promoted by our public policies and our public money. So what happened was Greenfield and Russell both folded because of the change in those standards. But what happened in Springfield, which is really sad, because that's our environmental justice community, that's a very poor community, they're stuck with this project because it turns out that they're able to do, I think it's a 35 megawatt power plant in Springfield, in a, of course, poor neighborhood, need renewable portfolio credits, doesn't need them. So there's no law against putting these projects in. It's just that they'll go in more likely if they get the credits. And I'd like to say that too, that that's true of these large boilers. If these large boilers need these credits to go in, what's happening is you're really just incentivizing more air pollution. We know that I can't stop my neighbor from burning wood all over wood wells, I wish I could. But why are we paying for this?
Good question. Oh, it looks like we have a need to address this issue. I'm not sure. I'll have to talk to my other colleagues and work.
We would love you to change the law. That's what I would like. Just go back to just pull it out of the law. There's no reason. We fought it at the beginning. We all commented in 2014. Ben Downey was my senator. I called him up. I couldn't believe he was doing this, especially in light of our fight in Greenfield, Russell, and Springfield. Look, we thought we made the case already, and here it comes again. And so we fought that law in 2014. We would love you to do whatever you can to instigate just pulling biomass out of this law.
I think our legislature needs a review of what this involves, tapping, what we can do about it. We come to you, talk to you. And thank you for all of your joining us today and for the robust conversation about APS regulating and as it regulates today.
Thank you.
That's the end, and welcome everybody.
Okay.
Thank you for your help.
Help on this. I did ask.
Oh, really?
That was so ridiculous. I remember that. It took me a minute to get back.
No longer our president. Very specific.
Thanks again.
Yeah. Done.
Still cares.
Oh yeah, she's doing a lot of great stuff.
I didn't have an that was supposed to be Take care, Mary. What happened?
Pay your Boris and she wanted to go upstairs to the state house to talk to the press.
We never have something to go if you guys are.
So are you, your short time, is that what you're saying? You need to go. Get the two, go get the two. Because, yeah, do that. I don't want to, because I don't know what we're going to do.
Right.
I'm certainly not going to do it right now.
Did you meet Daniel?
Thank you.
Yes, it is. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
All right, it's great to have you.
It always means
We
something.
know each other that well. Friends, it feels like we do. So you should.
I don't
Yeah, so he's in charge, so he's not on the other. It's not a natural.
So we actually have members. I feel like everybody on Facebook.
So many people on JVC.
Yeah, I'd love for you guys to be able to take and use it. Categorize when I was there. We do NASCAR and stuff. So we're sort of
If I don't see you,
yeah, you're all
which I may not before the holiday, I hope you get some rest. Well earned. Same to you, Jay.
Thanks, Sandy.
Take care.
Actually, our Springfield crew out there, okay, great. Got on the feet. Thank you, Sandy. It goes impressed. Bye, guys. Bye, guys. Sandy, by the way, I know, it wasn't totally accurate. I mean, it's not, they have a okay. They're not building it because they're not.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I wouldn't have said that exactly, but it's not. Yeah, it's sort of, they have to see and they can agree with it. And they're all invested in this stuff. Yeah, it did.
And you know, I have to say that 30% things that we described.
It never should have absorbed 10 years of all our lives. All right.
Thank you. Yeah, a bunch of people have that. Thank you so much. I work for a and my dad not mine. I don't know what to say. So yeah. Okay. Nice to meet you. Okay, where is it? If we're gonna go into the line?
As if you went out to find a building to the left, you just go down the hill.
I don't know what that is. No, but this is.
Okay, meeting's over. Catch of the day video news. I'm shutting the camera off.